And now our host, Stephen Lee Morris.
They have a few children, among them independent Shakespeare company. David Melville and Melissa Chalsma have been running that company for years. This is the company that puts on Shakespeare in the Park in Griffith Park. They also do Shakespeare and classics related smaller productions in their Atwater Village space when they're not performing in the park during the summer. Melissa Chalsma and David Melville, welcome to Animal Farm.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. It's lovely to see you.
Likewise, it's even on Zoom. It'll be lovelier when we're sitting in a theater. Well, like the same theater. And you've had 2 years, you said, of being indoors, and you are starting to reemerge. You run.
Oh, that's not really true. We were we did our outdoor festival last summer in a much more sort of reduced capacity. It was half the length and
1/5 the audience.
1/5 the audience. But we did it. We got out there, and that was great. And then we've been fairly busy doing a lot of online stuff as well.
Do say. Do say.
Oh, well, what did we do? We started off. It was really interesting, actually, the skills we picked up in the last couple of years, because the first thing, we didn't really know what we were doing with editing or anything like that. The first thing we did was we moved our fundraiser online. So we got into live streaming software so we could broadcast from this room.
And how did that go?
It was terrifying.
Yeah.
We had all these laptops and computers and stuff patched together. It was crazy, and because no one could engineer it, so we had to learn how to do it ourselves and press all the buttons. And we had remote guests and videos, and it more or less went okay. And I think that was actually really fun, because I think it was, for a lot of people, and ourselves included, it was one of the first moments in the pandemic when we realized there could still be lightness and we could still connect in some way. And then after that, we did a sort of...
That's crazy to think about, though, because when we did that benefit, which would have been May, right? I think even then people were still like, well, it's just going to be a little bit, it was still this kind of hazy dreamland that maybe it would...
Well, the summer looked good.
Okay, in a few months.
The summer was looking promising.
And then, so that was 2020. And then, so that summer we had to cancel then.
Right.
So we had our benefit. And so that year we did, isn't that wild? Like in the pandemic, that year of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Now, how is this going on still? But so we did a Romeo and Juliet that we live streamed. So it was a mix of live scenes and recorded scenes. And it had we were trying to figure out a way to make it really interactive, because our summer festival is usually we act in the audience and they come on stage and it's very kind of informal. So we tried to recreate that through social media. So you could follow different characters' Twitter accounts. And then through the course of the performance that was streaming, there was a script for social media. So you could follow Mercutio through the night as he goes through Verona. And the last thing he says is, I'm going to go meet somebody for boba, be right back. And then he doesn't come back because he's run into Romeo. And so we had this kind of social media scripted sequences. And it was really funny. Paris was getting collaboration requests because his social media account was so fabulous. But so we filmed that. And that was also very stressful because the live stream parts were from the garage. So when David had to go live, I had to, engineer, which was.
But we filmed it. So we took all the seats out of our indoor space and just turned it into a little film studio, basically. And we got an agreement with SAG, which was not the easiest thing to do, because we're supposed to be working with equity, and then it's sort of, oh God, there were fireworks. But so anyway, we ended up doing it with SAG, and we were working under their their COVID protocols, and it was sort of terrifying, wasn't it? The first
really
few days
scary,
where we're just like,
yeah.
we were suddenly back working with people, but every prop that had to be handed to someone was like doused in bleach and handed over. We're all wearing masks, and
I have I have actually an anxiety disorder around OCD with germs. And basically it was like the thing everyone said would never happen has happened. Yeah. And it was like, so I kept having to like go, and there were like moments where I just had to leave the room because it was, and I'm sure for a lot of other, even people that don't have anxiety disorders were experiencing like a really high level of emotional distress because of these, this happening. And that was a really small production. Like Romeo was the cinematographer. David played Friar Lawrence, and he was doing sound. It was just, we were doing it so small.
Yeah.
But it was actually, you can actually, we got a distributor for it, and you can actually buy a DVD and find it on Amazon Prime.
I have two related questions to what we've just discussed, and I will just ask them both, and you can choose them in whatever sequence you wish. Has this experiment in new technology that was compelled, or it was thrust upon you, to quote who, has that provided a window into possibilities for the future when there is no COVID, or that's never going to be, but when there is, when COVID is, we'll say, more manageable? That's the first question. The second question, I'm just curious about this fundraiser. How did it actually go in terms of raising funds? Was it more effective or less effective online than in person? Or so take either of these questions as you wish.
It was less, we raised less money, but not as much less as we thought. Mm-hmm. And it cost a lot less to produce. Mm-hmm. Because, it was, well, actually we had to invest in a little bit of hardware and stuff, but
so what was the net? When you saved money on the costs, you lost money on the income, comparatively speaking. Yeah. So how did it all come out in the wash?
I think it was about 20,000.
Yeah, about 20,000 or something, which
how does that compare to?
It's okay. It's not bad. I don't think for us events have never been, I know for some theaters, they have kind of certain resources that let them have really successful events. Or with really high ticket prices. I don't know how to put that.
You're being very cagey.
Yeah, Paul McCartney doesn't come and play at all.
We don't have like, say, CTG can host celebrity readings or something like that. Like we don't really have that, and we don't have that relationship with our audience, in the sense that the people that really want to come to our fundraisers would not really necessarily buy a $200 ticket.
Yes.
But we actually then last year we had to do it online again. So we have done 2 online fundraisers. Yeah. And so that was certainly a lot easier because our skills had grown so much over the course of the year, because we created so much digital content that by that point, we knew, well, don't do that. That's too much work, or this is the way to, and we were much more confident. That time we did it from our garage. We sort of hosted it, but we had, Tanya hosted it from her house too. So we had this kind of, so it was a little bit more easy that last time. And that actually was, I think, our most successful fundraiser actually between that and
it raised at least, if not more than the last sort of in-person one that we did.
So there you go. There's a lesson learned. Maybe.
I think so. I wonder if going forward, if people will still want to do, I feel like I think now there is an online fatigue. Like people are less inclined to go to it. For me anyway, I'm less inclined to go to an online event. At first I was, yes, I'll watch your reading, and yes, I'll do this. And of course, yes. So I wonder, even though for online fundraisers or online projects, what's really interesting is, of course, so for the Romeo and Juliet that we were just talking about, we had viewers in, I think, 13 different countries.
No, fantastic.
And that would never happen, obviously. But on the other hand, I feel like it's getting a little harder and harder to get audiences to turn up for online events, just because at a certain point it's not an event, right? When you're just opening up your laptop, it's not an event in the same way as it is when you're, I guess there's good and bad. Maybe I'm just talking. I should just talk about myself.
Our next fundraiser.
I have digital fatigue.
Our next fundraiser we're going to do is an in-person one. As long as there isn't another variant. But we're going to do it as a hybrid thing. So we're actually going to stream it too, so that people can, watch it at home. I could see us doing that, down the road, just because
we almost have to be ready. You have to be ready in case for that variant. And it's if you have that flexibility, the process of adaptation, you'll be much more nimble if you know what to expect, and there won't be that sense of panic that you're running sound and playing Friar Lawrence or whatever.
That was a bit. Well, what was it, going back to that, the first question you asked about taking skills or skills moving forward, is I think that we've done, maybe we'll go back to one of those projects, but I think that we have started to think about storytelling in a different way. Because we have, as you know, been very, very hyper focused on theater, as artists and as individuals even. You know what I mean? We don't also have a television career, for example. We really are theater practitioners. But this really, I think for David especially, I think you've been really inspired by the process of filmmaking. And so we just last summer also filmed, because we didn't know for sure that we would be able to be in person. So we filmed a version of Comedy of Errors that we're actually going to be streaming in a few weeks for free. That's just basically, it's a full-on feature film. It's literally it's just a film. It's a movie of
it's shot in multiple locations.
So those are definitely skills we didn't have 18 months ago.
Silver linings.
I guess so. And I think that's true. And I think the other thing for me that it did was I got much more internally focused. I think I have tended always to be the person in the room that's kind of cheering everybody on and, trying to always be projecting a positive attitude and all that kind of thing. And I think I at a certain point, I think just became so depressed that wasn't possible, which I'm sure a lot of people had very similar experiences. And Kalyan Ong, who's one of our ensemble members, said, well, what do you need to do? You need to make space for yourself to do something. And when COVID closed us all down, we were working on a production of Macbeth. And so about a year after the close down of everything, we returned to that and created this kind of online experiential exploration of Macbeth called a meditation on what was lost. It was it was called The Last Syllable, a meditation on what was lost. And it kind of interpolates the story of an artist whose production of Macbeth was shut down because of a global catastrophe, an unnamed, mysterious global catastrophe. And I mean, I never would have done something like that. And that was really actually wonderful because we were able to reconnect with Luis Galindo, who's one of my favorite artists to work with. And he had moved to Houston. So he's Houston based now, but he wrote the poetry and did the voiceovers. And so that was really exciting to realize that we could still be creative across distances with people. And I think that's something I'd really like to carry forward. And also the kind of dreamlike flexibility of really thinking about how do you tell a story and what does that mean? And I think that there were certain ways of having to adapt Romeo and Juliet for film that I thought, that would, how would we had an audience member who said, well, would you take any of that and put it on stage? And I said, well, which parts do you think you'd like to see on stage? And he had some really interesting observations about moments we'd been able to capture in the film that you wouldn't typically do on stage, but then why not? Why aren't we telling the story that way? Can we kind of pull stories apart a little more? And I mean, obviously I'm just talking about kind of deconstruction, which is not by any means a new idea, but it was, new for me to think about, especially classical plays in that way. And again, I'm not saying I invented some kind of, I'm understanding there are many more visionary artists than I in theater, but for me, it was something that I would be carrying forward, a silver lining, as you might say.
But I think in terms of, whether we'll see theatre become something that people can choose to either watch on their laptops or buy a ticket and go and sit in the theatre. I think that for me, it really confirmed that theatre exists as a live thing. And that's really important. There's no substitute for it. I mean, it's great that the National Theatre Live and all those things really work, and they're great. But they're sought after because they are big starry things. I don't think anyone's really going to be, approaching our work in that way. So I think there's been a lot of talk about how this, really could open things up. I don't really see that myself.
Well, it's definitely, I think, the difference between, I can just to highlight that statement from the perspective of somebody working on a piece of theater, the difference between sitting on a Zoom with a bunch of collaborators, working on something, and the difference between being in the room is just massive. I mean, the Zoom is great if that's the only way you can connect.
Yeah.
But the quality of I don't mean the good or badness, but there's a quality of being together that's, energy is reciprocal in a physical space.
Yeah.
You're sounding depressingly optimistic. I'd like to.
Oh yes.
I don't know. I mean, I think there's a reason why theater has lasted.
Yeah.
No. That's
maybe like the preeminent form of entertainment.
Well, with the Comedy of Errors film, which is called Live at the Porpentine, a Comedy of Errors. I think what we arrived at with that is, well, we've been given money by the government that we have to now pay artists with. We've got to do something. Why don't we, rather than putting something, paying everyone to appear on Zoom or whatever, why don't we put it into something that's really going to last? And just make a film rather than try and capture a piece of theater, which theater's beauty is that it's ephemeral.
Yeah.
And film is there to last. And if we're forced to make films, just make an effing film. And then we'll have something that's like a document of our work from this period that, not that, we want to suddenly become to do any more of that. I'm really quite looking forward to going back to theatre, but it was great to do that. And I hope that, that and Romeo and Juliet and The Last Syllable will be things that we'll be able to, they can have some life after the pandemic. And
well, yeah, and that is a really great point too, that so much of our mission is about paying artists and finding opportunities to actually employ artists who are dependent, and I think especially at the early days of the pandemic, they suffered so many people because they're self-employed, so they didn't necessarily have easier access to unemployment, you know what I mean? Like all of those things really made it so hard on artists. And so it was really great to just find opportunities to honor our mission, which is to make things accessible to audiences, but also to keep artists as employed as we could throughout the time. So that actually probably was one of the most rewarding things.
You're going to be back in the park this summer, all things being equal, all things.
Yes.
All things.
But we'll be, last year you may recall that there's been some talk about building a permanent stage in the park.
That's been going on for 5 years, I think.
Oh, no. We're now into our 11th year.
So it's been, the city of Los Angeles is charming in its Byzantine, slow, methodical process. It's just a unique aspect of our municipality that we're choosing to embrace. But so they actually did start construction though last year, which was really exciting. And I think the intention was for it to be done this upcoming summer. We haven't even announced this publicly. Maybe I shouldn't, we'll just say it now.
You just have now,
We just have now that it's, I think a couple of things happened. One of which was that the Omicron really obviously impacted the workforce. So that there was, so many people off work that a lot of construction has been really slowed down because of that. So our alternate space is just over the hill in this little dell. It's much sort of smaller, but we'll be back there this summer, but for a longer season, all things being equal, we'll be there for 10 weeks, which is our normal length of season. Mm-hmm. And that space, it was very interesting because it has absolutely no infrastructure, as in no power. So we ran the entire festival last summer off RV batteries that weigh about 1,722 pounds. No, they're not that heavy, but they're very heavy, and they have to get dragged back to the studio every night and charged. It just was, Stephen, we're getting too old for this.
Well, the other thing, the other question I wanted to ask was about optimism. And when we started this interview, not on the record, you both of you, I will say it, you had the shell-shocked look, expression, like as though you had been through some kind of war. That's just what I could read in your face. And then it lifted and you started getting more animated. And there was some even in discussion about, to do theater, you have to be an optimist. Just frankly, to get up in the morning, you have to be an optimist. You have to believe in something. And what we have seen, not only with Omicron, with the reactions to Omicron, with the confusion of Omicron, with the revelation of how selfish people are internationally, and how much of the population just don't give a hoot about principles that we thought were revered, such as, like democracy and somehow taking care of each other. What has this shattered? Doing theater is an act of faith in the ability to communicate, and the ability to communicate to like-minded people and persuade people of a value system that you believe in. Do you think, has that been shattered? Is a rhetorical question. It has, but can it be restored? Do you have confidence, or do you think, where are we? Where are we in 2022? And that'll be the last question I'll ask.
I think I'll start with an anecdote. Should I do an anecdote? I'll do an anecdote. When Trump was elected, so 2016, because I would argue all of this started way before the pandemic. And as David was saying earlier, I think before we went on record, you started to really see, the sort of people were revealing themselves, right? And in all kinds of ways, maybe good as well as bad. But I had so much disturbance in my spirit over his election and what that meant. And we went to England, where David is from, probably. You could,
where things are so much better. Things are so
so much better. But I got baptized. Our son was getting baptized, and I did not grow up in a religious family, but I got baptized. And the only way I could think about why I really wanted to do it was I was having so much trouble keeping love in my heart. And I wanted to take some kind of symbolic, ritual that was sort of this acknowledgement that at any moment, transformation is possible. Because of course, that's, the central tenet of many religions is the idea that there are miracles, and that, and I think, and that you can have a transformation that's unexpected and undeserved. And I think that, to me, are the Shakespeare plays I love the most are the plays that center on a final act where there's an undeserved, unexpected act of mercy or that transforms a community. And so that is my answer to your question. Yes, some days it is hard to believe that that's possible, but my faith, which in many ways is storytelling, teaches me that it's possible. And in fact, it's the only thing worth believing in for me.
I think it's, like I was saying, it's alarming to be suddenly aware how, as I was saying, as Charles Dickens refers to your fellow travelers to the grave, how many of them are complete arseholes. A good 40% probably. What are we going to do with it? I mean, it's useful to have that information now because, obviously if putting on a mask is going to be difficult for them, how are they going to respond when we tell them they can't drive a car anymore? Or shipping has to stop, or, air traffic is, this is what's coming. This is like the pandemic may just be an hors d'oeuvre. And the main course is a few decades away. But that's alarming, but at least now we're armed with that information. What do we do with it? I really do think that we have to, as a species, learn how to incorporate new technology and social media and things, and learn how to filter what it is and we haven't. It's happened to us so suddenly. We don't really know what it is. I mean, when the printing press was first invented, you know, anything that came out in print was suddenly just had this authority. So, you know, these pamphlets would appear, and they would be scurrilous, and, you know, they would, you know, people would be thrown in jail for it, and it would incite riots and stuff like that. And I think maybe now we can read stuff in print and know not necessarily whether we trust it or not, but we're still at a point, especially with our generation, I think, where if you see something online, it just, you know, it makes you angry, and you want to engage with it. Hopefully our children are developing more of an ability to filter that out. I can certainly see that in my son. So you know, our generation, I don't know, we just didn't know how to adapt. I think that one of the things that was responsible for the rise of Donald Trump was that because in 2011 a bunch of old fogies started Facebook accounts, and that, you know, that was meant for kids, and all of a sudden, you know, your auntie and your uncle was on it, and they're all sort of screaming at each other, and I think
screening out people with whom they disagree.
Exactly, yeah. So this thing that was supposed to bring us all together is the very thing that's dividing us. So personally, I'm now at a point where I think I'm just going to separate from Facebook and all of that stuff, which I know it's in a way it does have many benefits, and it does connect you with a lot of people. But I think at this point it's what is the harm it's doing outweighs any benefits. But you know, that's quite apart from theatre. I mean, I think all we can do is just keep doing what we're doing. I mean, what we do in the park every summer is to try to bring together a community. I'm always delighted when, you know, we see MAGA hats in the audience, or we get people, no, because you want to have people having that event who have who have a differing political opinion. Otherwise, you're just preaching to the converted. I mean, if we're just going to, you know, audience ourselves, then there's no point in doing it. We really do want to be welcoming, get those people there. Because, you know, if any author can do it, Shakespeare's, you know, great humane message is going to be something that might turn that ship around for some people. I had a lovely conversation after The Tempest with some people that were telling me that you can't trust the liberal media, and I really should be taking ivermectin. But, you know, I was just glad that they were there, you know, because maybe one day they'll sort of think about what was happening, and, you know, the message of forgiveness in that play might be something that they could apply in their lives.
David Melville and Melissa Chalsma, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next week, we are joined by Kathy Carlton. She came to Los Angeles from New York, where she was a practitioner of theater, primarily a performer. And she spent the better part, well over a decade in Los Angeles, primarily with theater of note, as their press representative, as a performer, and as a producer. And she has been on the East Coast for many years now and is returning to New York to do a play. She'll talk about that as well as her years in Los Angeles.
If you enjoy Animal Farm, please support us on Patreon.